For millennia, the accepted version of mankind's downfall came down to a single broken rule in Eden. You were taught that our rapid descent into destruction was just a natural character flaw. But the ancient documents, rescued from the dust of the Qumran caves, expose an infinitely darker root, a truth that the authorities of centuries past fought desperately to exclude, marginalize, and silence from the scriptures. The Book of Enoch does not merely describe a spiritual rebellion in the unseen world. It chronicles, with terrifying documentary precision, the physical handover of a forbidden technology. The text details the exact day when 200 celestial beings descended upon the peak of Mount Hermon, crossing the ultimate boundary between the divine and the mortal. What they brought was not a message, it was a package. Scientific, military, chemical, and astronomical knowledge that did not belong to men. Official history tries to convince us that primitive tribes mastered advanced metallurgy and siege engineering all by themselves through pure trial and error. But the hidden scrolls claim the exact opposite. Steel, the blade, and the art of illusion were taught in a dark, celestial classroom. The swords that slaughtered the early multitudes, the tools that forged empires of tyranny. None of this was human evolution. It was a poisoned gift. The price for receiving the secrets of the universe before our time was the complete collapse of our species, an irreversible alliance. It turned the ancient world into a landscape of corruption so uncontrollable that the cries of the oppressed would rise to the heavens, demanding the most extreme and radical intervention ever recorded, centuries before Christ. The real question haunting scholars today is not why the Watchers fell. It is what exactly they left behind, and how this forbidden knowledge still curses civilization to this very day. To grasp the monumental weight of this narrative, we first need to wipe the slate clean. Forget those mild, romanticized Sunday school illustrations. The archaic world, millennia before Christ, was harsh, unforgiving, brutally hostile. Survival cost sweat, dust, and calluses. Humanity was barely crawling, trying to decipher the most basic and savage rules of the planet just to keep from dying in the open. And it is exactly in this landscape of extreme vulnerability that official history goes dark. According to the Forbidden Scrolls, the true origin of our ruin does not begin with creatures of darkness crawling out of an abyss. It begins at the very top, with 200 high-ranking celestial beings known as the Watchers. The Book of Enoch does not beat around the bush, and it is not vague. It pinpoints the exact coordinates of the event. These beings touched down on the freezing summit of Mount Hermon, and what dragged them from the heavens to the earth was not a political conspiracy against the Creator. It was a far more visceral flaw, an undeniable physical attraction to the daughters of men. Led by entities meticulously listed as Semjaza and Azazel, they knew perfectly well the magnitude of the crime they were about to commit. They knew the bill would come due, and there would be no turning back. To ensure no one backed out at the last second, they sealed an unbreakable oath, a heavy pact at the top of the mountain. When their feet hit the dirt, they did not just cross an imaginary line. They shattered the ultimate security perimeter between the sacred and the mortal. But stop and look at the situation with the mind of a strategist. How could celestial beings guarantee the loyalty, submission, and affection of a terrified human race. How do you buy the immediate acceptance of those primitive tribes? The answer is exactly what justifies the sheer terror authorities felt in hiding this book. They decided to pay a dowry. And it was not gold, land, or cattle. They handed over a poisoned gift. Alongside the uncontrollable genetic chaos that would give rise to the giants known as the Nephilim, these angels handed over the keys to the vault. They gave primitive men and women the ultimate shortcuts to master matter, mind, and one another, a transaction that raises an unavoidable, dangerous question. What happens when you place advanced lethal technology into the hands of a species that lacks even a trace of the moral maturity needed to control it? This is precisely where the Enoch scrolls challenge everything the modern world thinks it knows about antiquity. Secular history tries to convince us that mankind learned to forge weapons, master metals, and read the stars through pure trial and error, slowly dragging itself forward over thousands of years. But the ancient text is clear, blunt, and terrifying. The hidden origins of the most dangerous and sophisticated knowledge did not come from natural human evolution. They came from a dark, celestial classroom. The fallen angels, led by the fearsome figure of Azazel, took on the role of teachers, instructors to a human race that was still fragile, utterly lacking the moral backbone to handle such power. They did not teach simple parlor tricks. They handed over pure, complex, destructive science. The Book of Enoch meticulously details how Azazel taught men to rip metals from the bowels of the earth. Suddenly, tribes learned to forge ruthless swords, razor-sharp daggers, impenetrable shields, and heavy armor. Power was no longer just physical dominance. It became technological, military, and profoundly lethal. But the corruption of minds and hearts did not stop on the battlefield. Other watchers passed down equally sinister knowledge to dominate the soul. They taught toxic botany through the cutting of roots and ancient incantations. They revealed astronomy and the signs of the clouds, leading men to worship the movement of the stars. And, in a much more subtle way, they taught cosmetics, the art of forging bracelets, working precious stones, and using antimony to paint the face and beautify the eyes. This was not handed down as mere vanity. It was a calculated tool for seduction, deception, and psychological manipulation. In the blink of an eye, civilizations living a simple agrarian life were catapulted into an era of military-industrial warfare, lust, and the occult. My friends and brothers, on this journey, before we move to the climax of this revelation and witness the terrible price the earth paid for this unholy alliance, I want to ask for something simple. If this study has built up your life, brought clarity to your mind, and helped you see the ancient texts with more depth, hit the like button on this video. It is through this small, noble gesture that we can bring these heavyweight messages to more homes and to hearts thirsty for wisdom. And I make a point of knowing who is sitting at the table with us for today's study. Leave a comment down below. Are you a Christian attending a church, seeking firmer roots for your faith? Or are you an independent student of the Word, fascinated by the history of our patriarchs and the mysteries of the past? Write it down below, because I make sure to read them and know who I am sharing these truths with. Now, brace your heart to grasp the sheer scale of the tragedy, because the very knowledge that promised to elevate humanity to the level of the gods was the exact tool that cursed us and nearly wiped our species off the face of the earth. The impact of this sudden, brutal technological leap was not progress. It was absolute catastrophe. How could a society that barely understood the natural cycle of the seasons handle overnight the steel, the blade, and chemical manipulation? The answer is predictable and deeply painful. Armed with an overwhelming knowledge they lacked the spiritual or moral maturity to control, men turned the earth into a literal slaughterhouse of ambitions. But before we describe the absolute peak of terror that fell upon the ancient world, we need to open a crucial parenthesis. Often, when reading the traditional scriptures, we lose the real sense of time. We read the book of Genesis, and in a matter of 2 or 3 pages, the narrative jumps from the perfection of Eden to a world plunged into darkness, ready to be swallowed by the waters. It is a dizzying leap that frequently confuses even the most dedicated readers. Where exactly does this technological corruption and the oppression of the giants fit in? That is exactly why, if you want to understand the Word of God without getting lost in the leaps of thousands of years between chapters, you need a clear map. I personally highly recommend and encourage every serious student to get their hands on the ebook, The Chronological Bible. We are not talking about simple reading material. It is an entire library of 66 books written over 1,500 years, completely reorganized into the exact order the events actually happened. When you read the Bible chronologically, from Eden all the way to the Babylonian exile and the early church, you begin to see divine patterns, prophetic connections, the guiding thread of redemption that stays hidden in the traditional order. It is an invaluable tool for your walk and for your family. The secure link to grab this definitive material and support our channel is pinned in the very first comment, right beneath this video. Now, put yourself back in that landscape of ruin. The Book of Enoch reveals that the catastrophe did not just come from corrupted human behavior. It came from the offspring generated by that dark pact on Mount Hermon. The unnatural crossbreeding between the Watchers and the daughters of men did not produce ordinary children. It gave birth to the Nephilim, the giants of antiquity, beings of colossal stature, whose brute strength was matched only by their insatiable hunger and their ruthless nature. The ancient narrative describes how, at first, these giants devoured all the labor, the harvests, and the resources of the human tribes. But the soil could not sustain the appetite of the unnatural. When the supplies ran dry and men could no longer feed their oppressors, the giants turned against nature itself. And soon after, the unthinkable happened. They turned against humanity. It was a period of unparalleled darkness. The human kingdoms, now equipped with the military engineering taught by Azazel, began to annihilate one another in a desperate bid to survive and dominate. Swords clashed, shields were shattered, and the soil of the earth drank the blood of countless tragic conflicts. Mortal civilization was subjected to the deepest affliction. Life was reaped without mercy, and pain spread like a plague across the plains and the mountains. The forbidden knowledge, wrapped in the false promise of elevating mankind to the level of celestial beings, was the very tool that enslaved us. It cursed us without pity. Families were torn apart by lust, and the illusions created through the charms and sorcery taught by the fallen. The world became so inhospitable, so unrecognizable and heavy, that the Book of Enoch narrates one of the most chilling and poetic moments in all of ancestral literature. It says that amidst the tragic end of thousands, the earth itself, exhausted and stained, began to cry out. The weeping of the oppressed, of those who had no power, no sword, no voice, shattered the barriers of the atmosphere. The groan of a humanity torn apart by blades forged with celestial technology rose to the heavens, demanding an unprecedented judgment. Up above, 4 majestic figures, the archangels Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel. They looked down, and what they saw was not just the sin of flawed men. They saw innocent blood being spilled in torrents because of an illicit pact. They heard the screams of souls perishing under the crushing weight of accursed knowledge. And when they brought this accusation before the supreme throne, it was sealed. The earth did not just need a warning or a correction. It needed an absolute cleanse. Total collapse was decreed. Heaven's response was not a fleeting warning or a simple moral reprimand. When corruption reaches the very genetic and technological roots of a planet, compromising the survival and the essence of creation, the only viable solution is an operation of absolute eradication. This is exactly where the most cataclysmic and debated event of all antiquity comes in, the Great Flood. Through the meticulous lens of the Book of Enoch, this colossal deluge takes on a new, terrifying layer of meaning. It did not just happen to wash the stained heart of man. It was a severe, strategic, logistical intervention designed to destroy the furnaces of forbidden technology, to dismantle the military engineering taught by Azazel, and to wipe out the corrupted bloodline of the giants that had subjugated the earth. Historical records and the scriptures reveal that this event, dated by scholars to around 2350 before Christ, was designed with formidable mathematical and architectural precision. While ruins spread across the plains, a single man described as blameless and righteous in his generation was drafted for a task that defied all logic. Noah. The preservation of life did not come through an immaterial miracle or a mystical rapture. It demanded hard labor, logistics, and heavy engineering. The ark was built following a blueprint handed down by the Creator himself with exact measurements: 300 cubits in length, 50 in width, and 30 in height. To help our modern minds grasp the sheer scale of this project, we are talking about a colossal vessel, roughly 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. It was not a ship designed to sail toward a destination. It was a maximum stability vault, built specifically to withstand the crushing fury of waters that would prevail over dry land for 150 long days. It was a cocoon of preservation, while the ancient world, along with its forged swords and altars of sorcery, was buried under the crushing weight of the ocean. But you might ask, and rightly so, what happened to the teachers of this ruin? What was the logistical fate of the watchers who crossed the sacred border and sold the secrets of the universe? The judgment documented in Enoch carries a geographical and tactical severity that still shocks us today. The leaders of this rebellion were not just reprimanded in the abstract. They were subjected to an extreme physical quarantine. Azazel, the primary bearer of military science and dark illusions, was bound hand and foot. He was cast into a desert, a rocky, inhospitable wasteland called Dudael. The text details how rough, jagged, razor-sharp rocks were piled on top of him, covering him in absolute darkness. There he would remain imprisoned, isolated from the light and from humanity, until the day of the great and final judgment. The celestial authorities literally cut the evil at its root, chaining into the bowels of the earth those who had corrupted its surface. However, the engineering of this judgment had to deal with a factor that water, no matter how vast, cannot drown: memory and human fascination with power. It is fascinating to note, from a historical and documentary standpoint, that the memory of this great cataclysm never faded. The mark of judgment was indelibly burned into the soul of civilization. Today, we know that more than 200 cultures scattered across the globe preserve incredibly strong narratives of a global flood in their traditions. The Epic of Gilgamesh, originating in Mesopotamia and dating back to roughly 2100 before Christ, contains a story of a purifying flood that is remarkably similar to the biblical account of Noah. Historical truth leaves tracks that no amount of denial can cover up. If the record of this dark pact and the monumental judgment of the angels was so vital and widely known in the ancient world, how did we get to the point where the Book of Enoch became a forbidden, banned, and marginalized work? This is the true logistics of political and religious cover-ups. Centuries after the era of our Lord Jesus Christ, the authorities who formed the councils and steered the dominant institutions made a drastic, calculated decision. The text of Enoch was weighed in the balance and deemed far too disturbing for the masses. And why did it bother them so much? Because the book lifts the exclusive weight of the fall off the fragile shoulders of humanity and openly exposes a conspiracy of celestial origin. It proves with cutting clarity that wickedness is not just a human character flaw. It is frequently the result of invasive technology and forces operating far beyond our immediate understanding. Accepting the Book of Enoch as mainstream meant forcing people to grapple with a deeply complex theology, one where beings of light cross dimensions, spawn genetic anomalies, and shift the axis of civilization by handing over premature science. For the leaders of that era, the safest strategy to maintain control and simplify doctrine was outright suppression. They cut the scrolls from the official lists, they discredited their accuracy, and they worked methodically to wipe its memory from the congregations. The manuscript only survived the fog of time because the truth has an undeniable rebellious force. An ancient, resilient Christian community in Ethiopia continued to preserve it with deep reverence, and as an act of divine providence, the bone-dry sand of the Qumran Desert protected the original copies in clay jars for millennia. The rediscovery of these scrolls in the 20th century proves one thing. No matter how hard empires and councils try to bury real history, the archives of the past always find a crack to surface and confront our present. And it is exactly the devastating impact of this truth on our modern world that we need to talk about right now. We have a terrible habit of looking at the past through a lens of pure arrogance. We believe, almost blindly, that ancient peoples were naive and that we, the men and women of the present century, are the unquestionable peak of wisdom. But I am asking you to stop for a second. Look at the world around you, but do it with the sobriety that only lived experience and accumulated years can bring. The bronze swords, forged in the profane fire of Azazel millennia before Christ, have given way to intercontinental missiles, autonomous weapons, silent warheads resting beneath the earth, capable of erasing entire cities in fractions of a second. The rustic potions and incantations used in the past to manipulate the minds of the masses have evolved into glowing screens, cold-blooded algorithms, and invisible networks. Systems that dictate with surgical precision what people should think, what they should consume, and who they should hate. The wardrobe has changed. The stage has been drastically modernized. But the dark essence of that ancient pact, forged on Mount Hermon, remains perfectly intact. And this forces us to face a deeply uncomfortable question. Is the runaway technological advancement that our society worships like a false god truly an irrefutable sign of our evolution? Or is it just the endless echo of an ancestral curse that we still do not have the courage to break? The great dilemma narrated in the hidden scrolls was never the science itself. Metallurgy, botany, the movement of the stars, and the laws of physics are all governed by principles established by the Creator Himself. The fatal transgression of the Watchers was handing the keys to a high-powered machine to a species still in its infancy. It was the premature, reckless injection of power into a humanity that had the intellect to build, but completely lacked the moral compass to preserve and protect. They handed matches to children who didn't know how to put out the fire. And isn't that the most accurate portrait of our civilization at this exact moment in history? We have mastered engineering on an atomic scale. We split the core of matter to release global impact energy. We have decoded the very language of life, playing God by editing our own genetic code. Our machines crawl across the surface of other planets, and our telescopes peer into the very edges of the visible universe. But at the exact same time, we flaunt a technical capacity that rivals the ancient gods. We continue to behave with the exact same spiritual fragility of the most archaic men. We continue to oppress the vulnerable, to idolize the temporary, to corrupt justice and trade peace for a few silver coins. The Book of Enoch warns us brilliantly that one of the most destructive weapons handed to men was not the iron of the sword. It was cosmetics and illusion, the art of appearing to be what you are not, seducing the eyes and blinding rational judgment. Look at the gears of our modern society. We have built global empires based entirely on appearances. Virtual networks project an unreal perfection, while an entire generation of young people and adults wastes away silently in dark rooms, consumed by anxiety, isolation, and a profound existential emptiness. The witchcraft of our modern days does not need cauldrons or mystical words chanted in forgotten tongues. It operates cleanly through an absolute addiction to the screen, mass disinformation, and the lethal breakdown of family bonds. The psychological manipulation introduced by fallen angels in antiquity has now reached its absolute peak of industrial efficiency. You, who have walked the earth long enough to see the seasons of life change, know very well the reality I am describing. Your generation knew a time when a man's word was worth far more than signed papers. A time when respect for the natural order and reverence for the sacred were the compass that kept families standing tall through the storms. You saw the great transition happen right before your eyes. You heard technology promise that the future world would be more united, more understanding, and more peaceful. But what do the cold, hard facts show us? We are more connected by fiber optic cables and high-orbit satellites than ever before. Yet, we are further apart in soul and affection than in any other recorded millennium. Depression has become the silent plague of the century, and anxiety has devoured the peace that used to live on our front porches and in our living rooms. The fierce historical judgment of the flood happened because the earth could not bear the weight of corrupted knowledge and boundless pride. The waters had to come down to extinguish the furnaces of iniquity and wash a ground that had become morally unrecognizable. Today, our furnaces no longer run on fire and coal. They run on data, silicon, and artificial intelligence. We test the absolute limits of bioethics. We flirt with creating artificial consciousness. And we completely, arrogantly ignore the most basic lesson of history. We do not own this world. We are just its temporary managers. When ancient authorities decided to silence the Book of Enoch, they probably never suspected they were throwing a dark veil over the clearest mirror of our own era. This time-worn manuscript is not just a dusty window into a remote, incomprehensible past. It is, in truth, a blaring red alert beacon for our immediate future. It backs us into a corner and forces us to ask, how far does humanity believe it can stretch the rope of science, greed, and self-sufficiency before the heavens decide once again that we have crossed the final line of tolerance? We were not cursed by raw metals, wild roots, or the constellations. We were, and we still are, cursed by our own presumption, by the childish illusion that we can master all the secrets of the cosmos without ever bending our knees before the sovereign who created them. Technology, when divorced from the fear of God and moral wisdom, has never been and will never be the path to mankind's salvation. It is just the slow, stubborn, and beautifully decorated construction of a brand new Tower of Babel. And for anyone who studies the scriptures deeply, there is no mystery at all about the final destiny reserved for those who try to reach the heavens relying solely on the strength of their own arms. We have reached the end of this investigation, but the reflection the Book of Enoch forces upon us is far from over. When we look at the dust gathered on these forbidden scrolls and try to understand the desperation of the authorities to hide them, the truth begins to jump right out at us. It is a fascinating historical and documentary fact. Even though the text of Enoch was swept away and removed from the official Bibles most of us have on our shelves at home, it was never ignored by the great apostles. Jude, the brother of James, made it a point to quote the prophecies of Enoch directly in his epistle in the New Testament. This proves an undeniable reality. The early church read, knew, and deeply respected this ancestral warning. It was the political and religious leaders of the following centuries who sat at massive council tables and decided on their own that the common people lacked the maturity or preparation to read this manuscript. They shelved the truth because a humanity that understands the dark spiritual origins of its own progress is infinitely harder for the system to manipulate. What Azazel and the Watchers offered at the top of Mount Hermon was the illusion of control. It was a tempting shortcut to absolute power. And our own history proves, through the crushing weight of wars and the ruin of empires, that every spiritual shortcut demands a brutal toll. They offered the secret of steel to forge the sword, the vanity of the painted face to seduce. and the cold map of the stars to predict the future. It was knowledge strictly focused on domination, lust, and bloodshed. And right here, we find the greatest and most beautiful contrast in all of biblical history. Millennia after that tragedy on Mount Hermon, another being descended from the heavens. But he did not cross the sacred border to hand over new military technology to defeat the Roman Empire, nor did he teach tactics for mass manipulation. Jesus Christ incarnated in the dust and the poverty to bring the one single thing technology could never manufacture: grace. He brought repentance, the forgiveness of sins, and total, gentle, willing submission to the will of the Creator. While the rebellious knowledge of the fallen angels cursed the earth, enslaved the weak, and demanded the radical purification of the flood waters, the sacrifice of the Son of God at Golgotha brought ultimate redemption. He paid the price that bronze swords never could, guaranteeing us the unshakable promise of a new heaven and a new earth, a place where there will be no crying, no death, and no corruption. You who are listening to me with sharp attention, you who have accumulated the wisdom and the scars that only the years can give, you know perfectly well that what I am saying is the truth. The human heart was not healed by industrial revolutions. It was not calmed by the rise of the internet, and it will not be saved by artificial intelligence. Our modern tech has improved the comfort of our homes and the speed of our travels, but it hasn't cleaned a single millimeter of our conscience before God. Mankind, without the rudder of faith and morality, remains the exact same fragile creature, one who will use the shiniest new tools to forge heavier chains for his neighbor. True and absolute wisdom is not found in trying to dominate the forces of the universe. It is found in bending our knees and recognizing our total dependence on the one who created it from nothing. And this brings us face to face with the most urgent reflection of our times. The scriptures record that the Messiah himself left us a striking warning. He said that the days leading up to his return would be as in the days of Noah. If the days of Noah were marked exactly by this explosion of corrupted technology, unchecked violence on earth, and the arrogance of man trying to reach the level of celestial beings, could it be that we are living at this very second the terrifying repetition of that ancient pact? That is exactly what I want to debate with you right now. Scroll down and answer me in the comments with total honesty. Do you believe that the current global obsession with technology and the accelerated loss of moral values are the irrefutable signs that humanity is repeating the exact same mistakes as the tribes before the flood? And what is your critical take on the historical cover-up of the Book of Enoch? Our documentary ends here, but the intelligent debate continues down below with your voice. Finally, I have a very clear call for you. Producing documentaries with this level of historical depth, with no strings attached, no cheap sensationalism, and no reliance on sponsors who want to dictate what we can or cannot say, requires monumental effort. If you value this kind of material and you want to see it continue, become an official supporter of our research. Click the Join button right below this video and step into our exclusive club. By doing so, you directly sponsor the production of independent knowledge. You help us keep historical and biblical truths free and accessible for thousands of people around the world. Your direct support is what keeps our work alive and strong. I thank you immensely for your valuable time, for your patience in hearing me out, and for your honorable company right up to this very last second. May the inexhaustible grace, the peace that surpasses all understanding, and true wisdom from above guard your mind, protect your family, and light up your home. A strong embrace, stand firm in the Word, and I will see you in our next deep dive study.